What we're going to begin this evening is something very close to my heart that is sort of work in progress. And a couple of you were on the Wonder Well, the Natural Dharma sitting that I led on Sunday morning last weekend, just a week ago, uh, called Freedom Attending Reality, which was sort of an overview of beginning with the great Dzogchen master Longchenpa and his view of of mind, and this poem that he writes about how freedom can attend to reality, especially in difficult times, in turbulent times. And I've been really sitting with this notion of what that means. How do we foster this quality of attending to reality, regardless of what it's like, through the lens of freedom? What is it that he is trying to get us to see here? And in some ways, what I'm working with and will be writing about, hopefully publishing at some point, is this 7-stage approach, not to be confused with Longchampa's seven treasuries. So he was a very prolific writer. So he existed in around the 14th century and really sort of codified, systematized the Dzogchen tradition, which is part of Tibetan Buddhist lineage of Vajrayana, or the Tantras, working with mind and consciousness in a contemplative way, and sort of really explaining to us what is the fundamental nature of mind or consciousness. Here, we're not just talking about cognitive mind or the thinking mind, but rather that essence, that source of mind that is already free, that is already clear and open. And so there are these 7 dimensions to working with a life that is in substantial change, or working with chaos, working with a world that is in turbulence. And how might we practice in this way? So what I thought we would do today is just sort of introduce some of these ideas. We'll begin also with the very first stage, naked awareness. Um, we'll be adding more. So a couple of you, as I said, were on the Natural Dharma Fellowship on Sunday. There'll be a little bit more information, so you're not checking out of boredom if you're here for the second time. And what's interesting here is that oftentimes in our practice, it can feel like the cultivation of freedom depends on circumstances. That the cultivation of a path of practice, I don't know about you, but for me, it's as if it depends on the conditions being right so that I can practice. Otherwise, the practice doesn't happen. How many of you actually fall into that category? Yeah, it's sort of part of the integration of wanting to cultivate while we're living these lives that are so hectic and so busy and largely so groundless, especially when we're online. We're existing in screens and boxes. Don't get me wrong. I think the Zoom has allowed us to gather for over 2 years now. And yet we really want to be mindful of groundlessness, which will be one of those 7 stages. So rather than having the cultivation of freedom depending on reality, which exists in a conditional state, that our cultivation really becomes conditional, we want to flip that around. We want freedom to meet reality, to speak to it, to include reality, to, as Longchenpa says, attend to reality. And just that subtle difference of, does my freedom depend on conditions being right so that I can cultivate? Does it depend on reality being a certain way? Or is it an unconditional state from which I meet reality as it is, regardless of what is happening? I know a lot of people who are going through life changes, feelings of chaos kind of out in the world around so many different issues, polarized kind of political views where people are feeling extraordinarily separate from each other. And so over these 7 stages, we're going to be working with some of these dimensions that are fundamentally relational. The first of them is the cultivation of what is called naked awareness, or the naked Buddha, which in the Bun tradition, where Tibetan Buddhism and Bun shamanism were fused together, Taparitsa is a being. I don't know how many of you have heard of Taparitsa, but he is sort of a yidam, or a figure meditated upon, who embodies bare awareness, just complete open clarity, transparent consciousness that is heightened and bright. And so anyway, that first stage being cultivating Longchenpa's view of what mind ultimately really is, what it means, as inclusive. And then the second one that we'll do then next week is on refuge and renewal. How important it is to cultivate a space, a sacred space for our practice that isn't just an escape from the world as it is, but rather exists sort of the heart of the world, where we renew, we can cultivate safely, we can regain energy and a sense of renewal, and we can actually cultivate the encountering of what is happening, with sort of a clearer form of subtle energy. And some of this will relate a little bit to the kayas, the 4 kayas, the bodies, like form body, energy body, wisdom body, and ultimately body of non-duality, of unity. And then the third week, we will look at sort of how do we cultivate the middle way, especially in polarizing circumstances, where it can be so tempting to need to be right about things that we sincerely believe, and not to be content with just being on one side of a polarity, but rather cultivating a much more non-dual approach to any issue that is confronting us. What we call in Buddhism the middle path, through the polarities to get to something deeper, fundamentally more deep, as a way from which to respond to what we may encounter. And then the fourth will involve equanimity, groundedness, a sense of stillness in the midst of the storm. How do we do this? We'll move into the fifth stage, which is about impermanence, and really kind of looking more deeply at the Buddhist teachings of impermanence, which are ubiquitous in Buddhist teachings. How impermanence leads to suffering, but also how it can be the source of opportunity for us in our practice and in our lives. Yeah. And then the sixth stage, fierce compassion. Compassion being really sort of that key to re-enter the world, to attend to reality. Compassion itself, a dimension of freedom, as after all, the heart is at the center of freedom, not just the brain, but it's really about the heart. And so fierce compassion, compassion that has an energy to it, that has a strength to it. And then the final one is seeing the path itself. And this is something we've talked about in our community, about how our view is inclusive of a path, not just a practice. That we are, whether we feel like we're on a path or not, we're on a path. How do we feel about that? Yeah, maybe it's the Bodhisattva path. Ultimately, the path of compassion, of awakening, so that this naked awareness that we cultivate is also imbued with great love and a lot of insight and spontaneous aspiration to act in ways that ease suffering in the world. And so anyway, these are the 7 kinds of stages that I've been working with for quite a while. And as I mentioned, this is a work in progress. I'll be writing about this, and I would welcome any feedback or any discussion that you have. I will be paying attention, and it will sort of only enhance this this sort of 7-stage samaya, what we might call a samaya. Samaya is a Sanskrit term that means sort of a dedication to have certain realizations. It's a practice. You can think of it as a practice. You can think of it as a vow. Longchenpa, within the Dzogchen tradition, defined the primary 4 stages of samaya as realization. These are realizations about things. And in the Dzogchen tradition, one of his many, many works is called The Treasury of the Natural State. He talks about the 4 samayas of Dzogchen, which is very cool, and it relates to our first stage this evening, ineffability. That this is one of the realizations we want to cultivate, which is the utter ineffability, the unspeakable and almost inconceivable nature of pure consciousness, the ground of our being. It's knowable, but inconceivable. We can know it, we can experience it directly, but it's like the eyes trying to see themselves. We have to let go of needing to use these organs to see our eyes. We know they're there. We can experience what we are seeing and the source of the seeing itself. So this is one part of it. So ineffability. And the second is openness, profound openness, what we might call emptiness, which itself is ineffable. It's a poor translation of shunyata, the Sanskrit word for emptiness. And the third is presence, that there is a source of wakeful presence that we can rest in. It is a fundamental quality of mind, after all. And then the 4th samaya that Longchenpa identifies as part of Dzogchen specifically is oneness or unity, is the realization that all things are so intertwined, they are part of each other, as are we. So anyway, it's a lot to chew on, right? And I don't want to throw all of this at you right here in the first few minutes. We're going to be going through these at a pace, hopefully, that allows for processing, for reflecting. I'm also open to any feedback through email or through the website if you have comments or questions. I'm actually really excited about this journey, and so we'll be in some way doing this over the next 7 weeks, one stage at a time. And my prayer is that this be helpful to you. Okay? The poem by Longchampa, the great sort of patriarch of Dzogchen. Dzogchen actually means great perfection in Tibetan. Great perfection. It's also called Ati Yoga, which is sort of the extraordinary yoga of cultivating mind. And he has this poem called Old Man Basking in the Sun, which is pretty good for not just Father's Day, but also about to start summer officially. We can bring these two together here. So this is Longchempa's poem. Freedom attends reality, free at the core. Any effort is wasted. Timelessly free, no release is needed. Free in itself, no corrective is possible. Directly free, released in seeing. Completely free, pure in nature. Constantly free. Familiarization is redundant. And naturally free, for freedom cannot be contrived. Yet freedom is just a verbal convention. And who is realized and who is not? How could anybody be liberated? How could anyone be lost in samsara? Reality is free of all these limits. Freedom is timeless, so constantly present. Freedom is natural, so unconditional. Freedom is direct, so pure vision obtains. Freedom is unbounded, so no identity possible. Freedom is unitary, so multiplicity is consumed. Thus, conduct changes nothing. Our lives are already free. Meditation achieves nothing. Our minds are already free. The view realizes nothing. All dogma is freedom. Fruition demands nothing. We are free as we are. That doesn't necessarily always feel true, right? So, one of the things we're going to do is sort of work our way into this fundamental truth that is already reflexively present, um, gently, without judgment, without sort of assessing what's wrong with ourselves. And as we read the bodhicitta prayer, this cultivation of the aspirational attitude, which is so fundamental to our practice. After all, we are here together because we want to practice together, because we are fundamentally in relationship not just to ourselves, but all that is around us and all whom we know and care about and love, as well as those we don't know, strangers and friends, and even those we find challenging. So we're really sort of working with these kinds of fundamental relational principles. Beyond the reactive habit body, to life change, to chaos, to uncertainty, the things we all share, especially as stress arises. The vagus nerve contracts, yeah. Imagine just a simple drop of bodhicitta motivation, bodhicitta, the mind of awakening that arises from the heart when we really seek to address suffering in a way that is already free. Our own awakening depends on attending to the suffering of the world. So let's hold that, for those of you who will be joining us more regularly on Sundays, let's hold that as an aspiration to what we are learning together and what we're practicing. The nature of our consciousness determines what consciousness then arises in the next moment. So we hold this samaya, we hold this vow, this aspiration for realization in this heart of love, and anything is possible.